Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Just getting started here on this Wednesday afternoon. We are very excited to welcome back Jay Townley from Human Powered Solutions to lead us in a presentation on the 2022 MBDA Cost of Doing Business Survey. The last time this report was done was in 2015, and we are very thankful to the generosity of BikeExchange for making this valuable report possible. Within over 100 retailers submitted data, which is in this report, allowing you to analyze, spot differences between your indicators and those of highly profitable retailers. This is a very valuable tool. I sent out a member email this morning asking you to bring some top level numbers with you. My hope and intention is that as Jay walks us through his key insights and takeaways today, that you can use those numbers you brought to compare how you're doing and just see really the value that this tool can offer you. Several of our P2 members, our retailer groups, refer to this study, and it will be the basis for our fall in-person meetings. We'll be really diving into the numbers. Unless you know your numbers, unless you study your numbers, there's a lot of room for error or misguidance. So we want to focus in on the importance of understanding your numbers and what it means to your business. And again, thank you to Jay Townley for walking us through the presentation today.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here. I will say that over the years, I've had a chance to work on and do webinars for the NBDA on the cost of doing business study, going back probably to the year 2000. I know the study goes deeper than that, but this is a great pleasure for me as well. So do you wish me to just commence and dive into it?
I think we should just go right in. It's great to see so many people here. Thank you, Jay. Yes.
Okay. If we've got some latecomers, that's great. They can join us. I'm going to stop my video at this point and focus on the slides. At this point, first of all, my welcome to all of you for being here. And as Heather's mentioned, this is the first NBDA Cost of Doing Business Survey webinar that we've done in 7 years. And it's the first since the pandemic, which I think is extremely important to keep in mind. So it covers the surge of 2020 and 2021. The very unusual market circumstances we went through that were driven by the pandemic. Now, for those of you who were in business 7 years ago, you might remember the semi-annual NBDA Cost of Doing Business surveys. And they were conducted for over 20 years that I was involved doing analysis and webinars. And I do believe for several years before the year 2000, we can certainly check with Fred Clements, who is still, he's, I believe, retired, but still involved in the industry. He's probably on this webinar from my email exchanges with him. And I am proud to say he is the editor of the Human Powered Solutions newsletter. So we do make sure that we work together on a monthly basis. But Fred can give us the idea of how far this goes back. But I'm confident at least they stretch into 3 decades at this point. Now we're going to go through our usual, my pushing buttons to get to the next. It was a much sooner than I thought. I normally, for those of you that have followed my webinars, have a problem getting from slide 1 to slide 2 after we get into the presentation. This one worked fine. So what we've got here is the cover of the 2021-2022 report. And during the course of this webinar, I'm going to do everything that I can to encourage bike shop owners and managers to purchase this report. Because we know from experience, which I've just described to you, several decades, that it represents the best financial guide to build your business plan on. And given the volatility of the present economic climate, this survey represents the best and most current financial planning data available. As Heather mentioned, this is going to be a focal point for the P2 groups. I believe it should be a focal point for everything that is done on the educational programs or as part of the educational programs for the CABDA shows that are coming up. We've got CABDA expos in January, February, and March. where the NBDA is taking a primary role in developing and presenting the educational tracks. And I do believe that the cost of doing business survey and the detail and answering questions about how to use the NBDA cost of doing business survey data to develop your own business plan is extremely important to bike shops going forward. And you'll see as we get into the numbers why we emphasize that and why we believe that. Now, we'll repeat this several times during the webinar. The NBDA member price for this report is $349, and the non-member price is $399. So the NBDA understands the importance of this study and is making it available to both members and non-members. Now, as we've done in past webinars, and you guys have followed my webinars are used to this, we're going to go through an agenda to give you an idea of what we're going to discuss today. And as I pointed out to Rochelle and Heather, this is an in-depth report. It's very detailed, and there's no way I feel I could do a good job if I dig into too much detail and in fact get to the point where it may be confusing without being able to show you the report and flip through it, which we can't do in the course of a webinar. So I want to give you background and also make sure we look at some key performance measures or key performance indicators, KPIs or KPMs. Look at the aggregate roll-ups that's in this report for you to work with, and then also do a bit of comparison from the 2010-2011 NBDA cost of doing business survey, which is a 10-year span, to this current report. And again, just some key pieces in subsequent webinars and writings about this, we can go into more detail, and then circle back to what this means to your business plan. And the fact that you do need to develop a business plan at this point if you don't have one. If you do have one, you certainly have to take a look at updating and revising. And we're going to take a look at a new approach to business planning using the NBDA cost of business survey as a base. And then we'll open this up to question and answer. Now, one of the keys here, I guess, is to understand more about the cost of doing business survey from the standpoint of what is this all about. And this is taken right from the second page of the survey itself. This survey is based on the 2020 results of an in-depth survey that was done for the NBDA by Industry Insights Incorporated from Dublin, Ohio. Two things that are important about this. One is this is the same market research firm, Industry Insights, that has done the NBDA cost of doing business survey since they started. So they also have about a 3-decade history working with the NBDA in bike shops. And so their methodology is consistent. It is absolutely consistent moving forward. Now, I thought it appropriate to point out the copyright that comes with this report. It is a copyright that says all rights reserved, no part of this report may be reproduced in whole or part without written permission from the National Bicycle Dealers Association. I would urge that some of the folks that are in the trade press take this to heart. Make sure that you work with the NBDA relative to getting permission to reprint pieces of this, because you'll be able to tap into a much deeper and richer body of information if you do this. In other words, I'm saying I think the NBDA is going to be a lot more cooperative if you ask them for permission to use the copyrighted material than if you try to not get that permission and in turn are cut off from any further input from the National Bicycle Dealers Association relative to this study. Now, keep in mind here that this, from the standpoint of professional research, is probably the best that's available in the industry. The Industry Insights Group is a professional research firm. It's a consulting firm. It specializes in industry operating surveys, compensation studies, educational programs, and customized research services. And again, the consistency here is 20 to 30 years, 2 to 3 decades of consistent looking at, applying, and the same methodology has been used for the NBDA, National Bicycle Dealers, cost of doing business for bike shops. So from our standpoint, as a research firm, in the case of Human Powered Solutions, We spend a lot of time looking at data and information. This is extremely important data. It's very accurate data, and it gives us insight, as it should give you insight into the business that we are in. And that is the retail, especially retail bicycle business. Spotting significant differences between your own store's performance and the industry composites actually can be the first step, as we said, to building your business plan. And the first step for you toward improving performance of your business. Keeping in mind that we're in a very volatile time. We're in a time when even economists are very confused about many of the signals that the consumer is giving off relative to demand and type of demand and shifts in demand. So we were just talking this morning a little bit between Rochelle and Heather and I about next steps for consumer research and whether it's timely to get into the next steps of consumer research. But that is a additive to what you're going to get here and what you can buy from the NBDA relative to this cost of doing business survey as the foundation for your business planning, using consumer research as one of those tools to help guide how you're actually going to implement that plan as you go forward. Now, we're going to dig a little bit here into the interpretation of the numbers. And this is one of my favorite explanations from the study. And I want to explain to you clearly that what you're going to look at, what I'm going to present, but what you're going to look at as a purchaser and user of this study is the numbers that are presented are medians or the typical. This means that the study does not switch between averages or means and the medians. It stays with the medians at all times. I like to describe this, and I have described it as the past, as the methodology here is shown in this slide, is you throw out the smallest numbers and the largest numbers, or the lower 25% and the upper 25%. You do this to avoid skewing. In a lot of work that's done, particularly research work like this, you'll get one very high number or one very low number, and it will tend to skew the overall average or the mean. To avoid that, what Industry Insights has learned to do and has done for decades is this methodology of reporting percentages and ratios as a typical or the median, throwing out the lower 25 and the upper 25 and presenting a number that is the middle of the middle, as shown here. Now, I also want to emphasize that we talk about ratios, and I'll spend some time taking a look at ratios and talking about how you use ratios. But the reality is this report is built on percentages, and the percentages have to be used very carefully, just as the actual dollar amounts have to be used carefully. But the ratios that are referred to are typically presented as a percent of, and in most cases, it's total revenue. But it also can be of a particular aspect of that revenue, which is pointed out when you take a look at how that number is derived. So in interpreting the numbers, be aware that what you're dealing with is a median or a typical, not an average. And in using ratios, while it is extremely important to analyze financial information in dollars, which is what you have, dollars and cents, it's also essential that you take your dollars and cents and your financial tabulations, your financial reports, turn them into percentages and ratios along the same lines, and in fact, following exactly the same lines as the NBDA cost of doing business study, so that you could use this data to compare. You could use it to compare it to industry standards. And the industry standard in this case is the NBDA cost of doing business study. So it's necessary, as an example, to know your annual payroll expense. It's the largest expense that most businesses, large or small, have. But it's even more essential to compare the expenditure with the value it produces. A useful measure of effectiveness of payroll expense may be the sales volume generated by it. Therefore, a ratio such as payroll expense as a percent of operating margin can be useful in determining how effectively your store uses its payroll dollars over time to compare to other NBDA firms in general, or you could compare it by your volume, your annual volumes, and we'll explain that when we get into the aggregates and also the comparisons that are made relative to revenue size. In addition, we'd like to point out that just as dollar figures are not too meaningful by themselves, ratios or percentages should not be used in isolation. So in other words, they have to be used in combinations. And they can give extremely accurate overall pictures of your financial performance as a business and also your financial position. Financial performance refers to how well your bike shop performs over a period of time, in most cases a year. And the financial position of your bike shop refers to the financial strength at a given point in time. And that becomes important in this environment because the inventory situation has waxed many people in the industry, as we say, into a corner. And you have to learn to deal with that situation and make sure that your business not only survives, but thrives going forward. So these are the two key points using ratios. And again, it repeats, but while it's extremely important to analyze financial information in dollars and cents, please be aware it's essential that percentages and ratios be used if the data is to be compared to past performance or to industry standards like the NBDA cost of doing business study. So from the standpoint of your financial statements, if you're not already getting your dollars shown also as either percentages, predominantly percentages, and or ratios, you should have your staff or accountant do that so that you can compare not just dollars. And if you're using dollar figures by themselves, keep in mind that they're not just that meaningful if you don't also have the ratios and percentages to go with them. So again, you shouldn't use any of these dollars, ratios, percentages in isolation. Use them in combination. Now, we mentioned key performance measures. You also could look at these as key performance indicators, KPIs. And the key performance measures tables in the cost of doing business study can be converted over, as Heather said, to the NBDA P2 groups. And so therefore you got a direct comparison. And now, in addition to your 20 group, you also could look at the broader picture of a national group. And you can look at that, as we'll show you, in aggregates of different types, revenue size, high profile or high profits, all respondents, number of stores, and so on. And we'll get into that detail for you. But at this particular juncture, the key performance indicators become an important way to do comparisons, both on your regional and your P2 group basis, and also on a national basis, as this report gives you the information to do. And for specialty bike retailers in general, there are three key areas to focus on: your profitability, your productivity, and your financial management. Now, profitability, without going into all of the excruciating detail, essentially can boil down to net profit margin, and Heather asked you to bring that information with you, and net profit as a percent of revenue. Your productivity is the output produced compared to the input expended. So how much did you put into it, and what did you get out of it? And your financial footing, or your financial management, and there are two financial management issues that are of prime importance to you as a specialty bike retailer: liquidity. What is your liquidity at any given point in time? And leverage. What is your ability to leverage the financial condition of your business for a loan, as an example, or to buy inventory more practically. Now, the aggregates that we refer to are very important in the report and very important to how you analyze the report and how you use the report. And so the detailed tables in this report are organized to include a number of important groupings of similar firms. And I'll show you some examples of that, but we would call these crosstabs in research work. So the first crosstab will show all respondents compared to high profit for revenue size, number of stores, single shops by selling square footage or multiples. I'm sorry, single shops by selling square footage of 25,000 square feet of selling space or over, and by region and size of community. So all respondents are all 100 stores, as Heather said, that contributed financial information to this report. And by the way, I'm going to show you data from 10 years ago where 102 stores are the base. So one of the issues that you as individual members and participants who are considering membership at the NBDA have to be aware of is I really urge you to work at convincing other store owners to participate in this study when the NBDA puts out a call for financial reports. The more specialty bike retailers that participate in this study, the better the information, the better the data, the more usable the data is to each and every member. And keep in mind, the way this has worked is that when the NBDA puts out a call for financial data, if you participate in the survey, you get a free report. If you're an NBDA member, you get a free $349 report. So that to me is very much worth participating. Now, what are these aggregates and these crosstabs? I said all responding stores. And remember, we're dealing with the middle of the middle. Primarily what you're looking at are percentages that are the middle of the middle, or the mean, not the average. So we're going to look at all respondents, then we're going to compare it to high profit. High profit stores are those performing at the top 25% by net profit. So out of all respondents, the highest 25% by net profit are considered the high profit stores. So you compare all to the high profit. Then you can compare them by revenue size. Those doing less than 500,000 in total revenue per year, those at 500,000 to $1 million, those at $1 million to $2 million, and then more than 2 million. Then you could look at that by number of stores, one or more. You could look at it by selling square footage. In this case, for single shops, by selling square footage of less than 25,000 square feet or more than 2,500, I'm sorry, not 1,000. And I'll repeat that. Single shops by selling square footage less than 2,500 square feet of selling space, and those of more than 2,500 square feet of selling space. Don't want to overemphasize and make that too big a number. And then lastly, we look at it by region and size of community served, because that becomes important to many bike shops to be able to make that comparison in the course of taking a look at their business planning, both as they relate to the present performance and then future performance as put into the planning process. Now, I pulled this from the report. This is one of the ways the aggregates are shown. And this is a much bigger table. Again, I kind of struggled with, do I show all the detail or do I boil it down to key issues? I thought key issues and takeaways would be more relevant, so that you actually have to get into the whole report and the detail of the report, which is preferable, quite frankly, but it's difficult to do if we're just going to do it in a 45 to 50-minute presentation in a webinar. So this, I thought, was the better way to show this to you. For this current report, in other words, in the 2020 results for the 100 stores, margins and turnover for all respondents for bicycles, the initial markup at retail. Now, this is after discounts. So there's a mark on, which is the original retail you wanted to get, and the initial markup at retail, which is what you got at the end of the day. The initial markup at retail compared to the gross margin, which is the realized profitability. All respondents, the initial markup at retail was 38%. The gross margin realized after discounts was 37%. Good. That means during the pandemic and from the 2021 results, you weren't discounting a lot out there. Didn't have to, because there was a COVID-driven demand for product. The high profit stores, the top 25%. The initial markup was 38%, which you wanted to get at retail for bicycles. The realized gross margin after discounts, 35.5. For the high profit stores, a little lower in gross margin, probably indicative of a different kind of merchandising for the bigger stores, particularly the multi-stores. And your inventory turnover for all respondents, 2.6, very high. The high profits, a little lower, still high at 2.4. Gross margin return on inventory, GMROI, if you're measuring that, take a look at your GMROI. All respondents, remember this is the mean, 147, and exactly the same for the high profits, 147. So this gives you an idea of what the NBDA cost of doing business survey of 100 retailers found when it looked at margins and turnover, just one small piece of the overall that was looked at. And what was off to the right here were the crosstabs comparing to some of these other aggregates. If you got questions about this, we certainly will do our best to answer them. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, and I'll just repeat. The initial markup at retail is what you wanted to get. The gross margin is what you realized at the end of the day after any discounts, and that includes employee discounts that you gave in order to sell the product. Now, this report shows the results, the percentages in different forms. And this is one of the graphs. Now, this one happens to be titled revenue by type, but I thought you'd find this interesting because if you look at the bars down at the bottom, the lighter blue are all respondents. The dark blue are high profit stores. Revenue by type. Bicycles were 34% of the revenue of the typical specialty bike retailer and 32% of the revenue of high profit stores, the top 25%. Parts and accessories, 24% of total revenue for all respondents, 29% for high profit. E-bikes, 18% of revenue for all respondents, 13% for high profit stores. Bike repair, 15% for all respondents, 14%, just slightly lower, for the high profit stores. Bicycle rental, I would have thought would have been higher. As you can see, 3% for all respondents, 1% for high profit. I'm wondering if that's going to change as we see this demand slacken, as we have, and retailers are looking for different types of profit centers, but that be that as it may. Used bicycles, this includes used e-bikes. 3% of total revenue by type for all respondents, and below a percentage point, too small to measure, for high profit stores. This is a concern, I think, from the standpoint of how you plan for the future, and we'll discuss that in more detail. And then fitness equipment, and this surprised me a bit, 1% of total revenue for all respondents, 5% for high profit stores. High profit stores obviously were doing more in fitness equipment, and perhaps is one of the reasons they were high profit stores. Not sure, but the analysis that you go through in the detail for your particular store, I think would ferret that out. And then other, 2% other products for all respondents, 5% for high profit, which has been historically about where that revenue contribution has gone. Now here again is a more detailed look at a page from the actual cost of doing business survey and the study. This is by revenue size. There's another one of the crosstabs. General company information, store type. Now, one of the things that I think is important here is the NBDA has provided for specialty bicycle retailers, which were the majority of respondents, sporting goods stores with bicycle departments, and there are some big specialty bike retailers in this category, mass merchandisers with bicycle departments, which actually the NBDA should be reaching out to, and there should be gathering of more information to fill this in. And then other, which can be looked at the other categories of sales within the channels of retail that are selling bicycles in the United States. And this has been cross-tabbed to the size of community served. That's also up in the upper portion. And the cross-tabbing here by revenue size is less than $500,000 in total revenue, $500,000 to $1 million, $1 million to $2 million, and more than $2 million, going from left to right. And then the cross-tabbing of that is down below with metro market size. So for metro market areas of over 1 million population, you could see the percentage of specialty bike retailers doing less than $500,000, $500,000 to $1 million, $1 million to $2 million, $2 million or more. The same for moderate sized cities, small cities, and small towns. And all of these have to be looked at from the standpoint of where are dealers located, and in turn, what are the markets that are most favorable to dealers in what form? What is merchandised and sells better in the different metropolitan or different population sizes? And that again can be derived from the type of information contained in this report. Again, looking at a bar chart from the study. This one is titled Net Income Before Tax. And so to the left, you've got all respondents and high profit. And what you're comparing to in a cross-tabbing is number of stores, which you're looking at the bottom. One store or more than one. And then to the far right, single shops by selling square footage. So you can compare, again, it's important you take your dollars, convert them to percentages so you can compare to this report and determine where your store fits and where there may be areas for either improvement or where you're overperforming. Now, this one is titled Net Income Before Tax. Again, you got all respondents in high profile. You'll note the percentages are the same. This goes to what we were looking at earlier in cross-tabbing. The third bar is major metro area. Then you go at 13.3% of moderate city size, small cities, town or rural areas. Again, the location issues and the community size of where bike shops are located. And then regionally with 100 dealers, remember we're going to look at some data from 10 years ago where we had 102 dealers, so it wasn't that much more. It's important if dealers want to know more on a regional basis that you recruit more dealers to participate in this survey and let the NBDA know who the dealers are that will participate going forward. But right now, we're able to look at this on 4 regions: West, Midwest, Northeast, and the South. And the hope would be to get more dealers recruited to participate in this study, whether it's annual or semi-annual, and be able to break this up so that you could look at census regions. Break this into 8 parts instead of just look at 4, so you can fine tune it. Now, what I've done here, I will take time to explain, and we're going to spend a little time on this chart. What I've done here is a comparison from the 2010-2011 cost of doing business study, done exactly the same way with the same methodology as the 2020-2021. So if you go off to the left, I've got revenue by type, bicycles, e-bikes, the subtotal, because you have to look at them in combination now. Then used bikes, parts and accessories, repair, rental, fitness, and other. We looked at some of that in an earlier slide. We're going to look at the detail here. And then I added to this the cost of doing business, or the total operating expense. And I put this here because of the Phillips rule, which I won't bore you with, but many of you are familiar that I use this frequently, and I can explain it when I get down to the cost of doing business. So 2010, 2011, 10 years ago, the typical, the median, and the high profit, which is 25% of the total. Revenues by type. Bicycles were 45.9% of total revenue for the typical, 47.4% for the high profit. In 2021, 10 years later, bicycles were 34% of the typical dealer's revenue and 32.4% of the high profit stores of the top 25%. E-bikes. Back 10 years ago, they didn't exist in the market. There were so few sold, if any, that they were zero. However, what the NBDA wisely did in this study was make sure that e-bikes and used bikes are measured. And this is going to be very important going forward. So for comparison, the 2021 report shows that e-bikes were 17.6% of the typical dealer's revenue and 13% of the high profit stores, the top 25% store revenue. So the total here, and remembering we're using the definition now that the CPSC has placed on bicycle to include e-bikes with motors of 750 watts maximum and a maximum speed when propelled only by that motor of 20 miles an hour. So the subtotal 10 years ago was a 45.9% for all, or the typical, all respondents, 47.4% for the top 25% or the high profit, 51.6% bicycles and e-bikes, or bicycles under the new definition, for the typical dealer in 2021. Gives you an idea of both the importance of e-bikes, but also the change in the overall revenue on a store basis. And for high profit, just a little lower. For high profit stores, the top 25%, bicycles and e-bikes, or the combination, was 45.4%, down from 47.4%. But the big difference here is the typical at 51.5%, over half. Used bikes. Again, we showed them as 10 years ago. Most of the activity, by the way, was after 2011 in used bikes in the market. The 2021 report, used bicycles at 2.5% of total revenue for all stores, 3% or 0.3% for high profit. We think that's one of the areas you need to look at for improvement. Parts and accessories, 10 years ago, 36.7% for all dealers, 39% for high profit. 2021, 24.2% for typical, 28.6% for high profit. Not as much of a contributor to the overall revenue of a bike shop compared to the total of bicycles as defined. Repair. Now this, again, I find extremely interesting because I know that there was a lot of pressure on bike shops, you know this too, on the repair side. 10 years ago, 10.27% for all, 10.57% for the top 25%, 15% for the typical in 2021, 14.4% for the high profit shops in 2021, 10 years later. Rental, again, 1.2% for typical, 3% or 0.3% for high profit 10 years ago, 3.2% revenue contribution for all stores for the typical in 2021, high profits 5.5%. Fitness, 2% 10 years ago for all, 1.5% for the top 25, 1.2% 10 years later to the present to 2021 for the typical, 5.5% for high profit. And then other forms of business, skateboards, snowboards, skis, et al., 4.1% for the typical bike shop 10 years ago, 1.3% for the top 25%, 2.2% for the typical in the 2021 survey, and 5.3% for the high profit stores. Cost of doing business. Now, this becomes important because the Phillips rule explains a simple fact of life for a bike shop and for all retailers for that matter. Don't ever sell anything in your bike shop below your cost of doing business, your total operating expense. The point being that you lose money when you do that. So the cost of doing business, or the total operating expense, 10 years ago was 40.7% for the typical store. For the high profit stores, the top 25%, it was 33.8%. Today, the 2021 survey shows that for the typical store, it was 34.3% lower. That is good. It means that your total operating expense went down compared to total revenue. Your cost of doing business, or your break even, went down. And for the top 25% of the high profit stores, even lower at 27.9%. The challenge for today then becomes, how do you maintain this? How do you keep it from going back to the higher total operating expenses of previous years? And of course, we can only look so far at this. But relative to how you use the cost of doing business study, we submit to you that this is the kind of comparative data you need to put into developing your business plan. And at this point, we ask a simple question. Your cost of doing business study is most important to you as a contributor to and a key foundation and data, key foundational data for your business plan. Do you have a business plan? If you don't, we strongly suggest you begin to develop one. The NBDA will help you do that. We have, in looking at this situation, and there'll be more of this in our monthly newsletter and in articles that are written by Human Powered Solutions about this topic, we have hit upon the planning approach for bicycle shops and for especially folks in the specialty bicycle retail business, including suppliers, on a three-step planning process. What we call the short plan. Look at the next 2 quarters, the next 6 months. Take a realistic assessment of survival for some businesses. I hate to say that. I mean, I get criticized for being too negative, but quite frankly, management by hope won't work. So take a realistic assessment of what your chances are for survival as a business over the next 6 months. What is the profitability you can generate? What is the productivity your business can have? And what are the financial management features that you have to build into your management process to be profitable, to survive over the next 2 quarters? Mid-plan, and this is concurrent. You have a short plan, then you have a mid-plan. The next 4 to 6 quarters, 12 to 18 months. Take a look at realistic sourcing for your products, particularly your bicycles and e-bikes. By realistic, I mean, who can you count on to make sure you've got product when you need product and you don't have to over inventory at these higher interest costs? Back in the day, in the midst of the surge, there was low interest. Banking up inventory, when you looked at it, didn't have the same cost it has today, which means higher cost, higher risk. So look at realistic sourcing. Who could supply? Who could provide reliably, reasonably within what are the disruptions within the supply chain? Take a look at your merchandising. And by that, I mean product selection, what you curate, what your pricing policies are, what you are handling in the way of merchandise, including used product. Look at your profitability. Look at it very carefully relative to cost of doing business. Look at your productivity up and down the line. Where are you putting time, labor, and expense in? What are you getting back? And then what are your financial management tools and how do you apply them? Focusing primarily on the liquidity of the business. Your long plan. Absolutely essential that you have all 3 of these pieces. The long plan is the next 8 to 10 quarters, the next 24 to 30 months. And you do this concurrently with the short plan, the mid plan, the long plan. You look at these together. And if you need be, you update and change these every quarter. I would say now at this particular timing until you have a better handle for what will contribute to and disrupt your business. Now, with that said, I mentioned merchandising, gross margins. This goes back to the report itself and what you can get from the current cost of doing business survey and study relative to gross margins on. And this is also, I put this here because this is a guide to the planning process in my view. It's one of the metrics that you could use as a guide from this report immediately. This is in ranked order. Used bikes, including used e-bikes, had 50% gross margin realized after the mark-on. This is what the shops that reported actually achieved. So the low percentage of used bikes, I understand. The percentage of used bikes as a contributor to revenue going forward, you should look at very seriously based on the fact that this is the highest margin product in the mix right now. Bicycle parts and accessories, 47% gross margin realized. Clothing, 45%. Fitness equipment, 41.5. Bicycles, 37. And e-bikes, as my friend Fred Clements opined to me as we were looking at this earlier in the week, the gross margin on e-bikes sucks at 31.5%. It's one of the things you'll find when you dig into the cost of doing business report. This was one of the surprises of the report. It was looked at very carefully, but it points out that you as a specialty retailer have to look very carefully at every aspect of your business and particularly the margins on products. And I don't want to get into speculating why this is lower, but go back and look at your cost of doing business and never ever sell anything in your bike shop below that cost of doing business. You'll see why e-bikes becomes important and why it's an important aspect of this report. So with that said, I'm going to go back to this chart very quickly, which I added. And you've seen the top portion of this. Revenues by type, 2010, 2011, 2020 compared to 2021. This is the 10-year comparison. We looked at everything all the way down except for this last line. Your net income or loss before tax. Net income or loss before tax. Did you bring that with you as Heather asked you to? If you didn't, you must know what it is. If you don't, look it up. 10 years ago, the typical bike shop from the NBDA cost of doing business study showed a net income or loss before tax, in this case, thank God, a net income of 4.6%. 10 years ago, the high profit shops, the 25% that we all in the retail business strive to be, net income of 13.1%. This is of total revenue. 10 years later, here's the result of the surge. Here's what you need to look at and protect with your three-stage or three-part planning process. Here's what you need to reach out to and protect and figure out how you're going to preserve relative to buying a copy of this cost of doing business study and incorporate it into your planning process. 10 years later, the typical bike shop had a net income of 15.1%. And the high profit stores, the top 25%, 25.9%. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. This is what your planning process is all about. This is why this report is extremely important to you. This kind of detail for your business is exactly what you have to have now to put together your business plan for the future. And for many of you, it's going to be the difference between survival or not surviving the turmoil of the next 5 years. So I'll leave you with this. Join the NBDA, nbda.org. Purchase the CODAP, the survey, the cost of doing business survey, $3.99 for non-members, $3.49 for members. Investigate becoming, when you become a member of the NBDA or are a member of the NBDA, becoming a member of a P2 group. This is a financial community. Participate in NBDA seminars and business education opportunities, both at the expos and also through their webinars and podcasts. And update or start your business plan now. Don't wait. Get off this call. And if you got one, pull it out and start revising it. If you don't have one, start one. If you want to know how, contact me. I'll be more than happy to help you. So this takes us to questions. I prattled on and went longer than I had actually intended. hopefully we've left some room, Rochelle, for folks to get some questions in, and about 10 minutes.
Yeah, we do. We do have some questions. And then just a reminder to anyone, if we don't get to your question today, we will forward it on to Jay and we'll get it answered via email. So feel free to send in your questions, even though we only have about 10 minutes. So the first question we have is, how are the 100 stores that answered the survey chosen, and by whom? Are they all NBDA members? I'll say that we sent out the invitation to NBDA members first, but then we sent it out to the industry at large, and we got respondents from NBDA membership and outside NBDA membership. So everyone had the opportunity to reply, and the 100 stores that did reply are the ones that chose to.
Excellent response. And I would add to that, how the 100 were chosen was by their participation. They were chosen if they filled out the financial form and sent it back.
Yeah.
So it was not a selection process. It was not picking one over another. It was taking everybody that responded with enough detail to include in the report. You'll find in the report, there are asterisks where there was not enough information to actually put together information. This again begs the issue of the more dealers that participate, the better off this type of survey and every dealer that can purchase this survey and use it will be. Did that answer the question, Rochelle, between the two of us?
I believe so. Next question, is repair labor only? Oh, is repair labor only or including parts sold associated with the repair?
I cannot answer the detail of that question, but I would gladly dig into it to see if it is separated. From past experience, I would think it's total ticket. But again, I don't want to speculate here. I'll have to ask.
All right. We do have several comments that the website was listed as nbda.org. It is nbda.com. Thank you to those who...
sorry. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you to those who wrote in. Oh, I appreciate it. Here's a question. I'm interested in your prediction as a futurist. What do you expect the cost of doing business number to rebound to over the mid to long term?
It's a good question. It is a question that will need to be looked at frequently. It's going to depend on a lot of economic indicators, not the least of which for the United States will evolve around the cost of doing business, the costs of doing business, energy, the cost of the basics to operate a business today. And as you're all aware, your business people, it's in flux at this point. Interest rates probably are the one thing you can point at right now that have gone up, so that if you have the need to leverage the business to bring in inventory, to finance inventory, your cost of doing so has increased. You're watching what Walmart and Target are going through relative to those costs. So the cost of doing business, we project to go up. We're hoping that through good management practices and the best practices that the NBDA will be adding to, they've already started with them, but adding to the best practices available to bike shops, particularly through the P2 groups, you're going to be able to keep the lid on the cost of doing business. At the same time, you're able to maintain fair and equitable margins, the realized margins. And I know that is not a complete answer that you're looking for. I think bottom line here is expect your operating costs to go up. The idea behind the planning is to do your best to keep them within reason. And some of this is going to go to cost of goods and making sure that your curation of product is for product that you're bringing in at the best possible cost of goods that you can negotiate or have available to you in your marketplace, which goes to the cost of doing business.
Next question. Are products categorized as fitness, known, and consistent? The 5.5% for high profit stores catches me by surprise and has a significant impact on the percent of revenue coming from P&A.
Well, yes, that's all true. From the standpoint of classification, again, I would have to defer to the questionnaire and also to the researchers. But this will start with the dealer looking at fitness equipment per se as a category. So I don't want to speculate without knowing for sure. But as a merchandising category, I would think that it is inclusive. In other words, I don't think it's selective. All fitness equipment sold by a specialty bike retailer.
Yeah.
But I gladly will dig into that and get a more definitive answer for the questioner.
Great. Because the participants were self-chosen and it was not a selection or randomized process, what biases do you think resulted?
Again, I'll defer to the researchers. Some of this will have to go with the panel size too, relative to biases, but because of the fact that it, as you notice from the data, it's predominantly specialty bike retailers. And the others are, we'll have to look at them, but this survey was open to, if I remember right, Rochelle, this survey was open to mobile as well.
That's correct.
Yeah. I don't think there were enough of them to actually bias the survey. So I don't think there's a huge bias factor here based on the results. With more input, this will depend on whether there's more mobile service, in my opinion, where you don't have the stronger merchandising components. So I guess my general response to that is I don't think, without checking further, and I will check further, I don't think there was a strong bias here.
All right, I believe one more question for today. I noticed rental revenues increased over the last 10 years. Do you have any idea on how margin looks for rentals?
I would defer to what I see from the folks that are in the rideshare business, and rental margins really went through a bad patch during the pandemic, and they're starting to come back now much more strongly. I guess my best answer would be I don't know at this point, but NABSA, the North American Bicycle and Scooter Rideshare Association, just published a report for 2021 about 10 days ago that has much more information on that subject if the questioner wants to get that report. If they don't know how to get it, contact me and I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
All right, great. I think that's about as much time as we have. So thank you, everybody who's here. If anybody watching the recording has any questions, please feel free to send them directly to Jay. His email is on the screen, or send them to info@nmediae.com and we'll get them forwarded. We will answer every question that comes in. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Jay, for your insight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for attending, and thank everybody for their questions. And we look forward to working with you on the cost of doing business study going forward.
Perfect. All right. Have a good one.